I think I have to do something as a public service because there's a lot of confusion, and I wouldn't mind clearing it up.
There you go.
And it's something that only we can do. Now, I could do this myself in 5 minutes, but I feel if I do it with you, it'll take a little longer, but it'll be much more entertaining, and you'll be able to fill in some of the blanks when it comes to the actual history of podcasting. Are you interested in this one?
Well, first, let me preface it by saying that I believe that this came up on a recent show by the guy who's been accused of being an alien.
Yes.
I'm going to give you the big enchilada. Joe, there are aliens in this room right now.
For real?
Yeah, you're not of this world, bro.
Me?
You're the alien.
Oh, wow. I didn't know.
Yes.
By the guy who's been accused of being an alien.
Well, this is Joe Rogan's show, and the reason I'm doing this is twofold. One, because they didn't know, and of course, here's 4 guys who first they drink whiskey, then they're drinking Red Bull, then they're drinking beer, then they're smoking a blunt. I don't know if I could tell the story.
It's a 4-hour show they did. It's
a very long show, this particular one, but they were trying to figure out some of the genesis of podcasting, and I'll just play a little bit of, because it was, like 5 minutes, but I'll just play a bit of it.
Yeah. Well, who was the first ever?
Ricky Gervais.
Is the first at what?
Is that true?
Ricky Gervais.
First
Corolla
what?
got into the mainstream.
But what about the guy from Adam Curry?
The Podfather.
Was he the first?
Yeah, but what
Keith
had
and the
happened
girl was doing it for a while before
They've been doing it a long
started.
time.
Keith and the girl was a long time.
Damn, we should probably establish who was first, right? Like George Washington was the first president. We're all professional comedians. Most professional politicians would be able to tell you who the first fucking president was.
See, I really like that he said this because now he elevated me from podcaster to comedian. I did feel kind of good about that.
No idea.
We're like, who's the first podcaster?
We really don't know, right?
Dude, I heard
There was internet radio. There was internet radio, and then it just became podcasting.
Who was first between you and Marin?
Him, for sure.
Marin.
For sure.
Yeah,
I don't know.
for
I don't
sure.
know. I'm asking.
Now you know. Well, now you know. Why don't you stop arguing?
Here's what I think. I think that Adam Curry was number one.
Who's Adam Curry?
Adam Curry is an
Am I right?
ex-VJ from MTV.
Yeah.
And he is known as the Podfather, the guy that started podcasting.
I think he's
Ricky
number
Gervais
one.
has
Did he
the
marry
first
that
recognizable
model?
one.
I don't
Adrian
know
Curry?
his relationship history, but I think he's the George Washington.
Who is Adam
Curry. I think he is.
See, and that's enough of it. That to me is a great comparison because it's like who invented podcasting. It's like who invented America. I'll just put it on that scale.
Who invented America? It should be Thomas Jefferson.
Well, but you see, George Washington was the first president, and he's recognized as the first guy. But there's a lot of evolution that came before that, which I'd like to do that for podcasting, just so people understand for once and for all.
No.
What?
They're not going to understand for once and for all. These other guys come on these podcasts, and they don't know what they're talking about. They're throwing out Adam Carolla and Ricky Gervais is the first guy. I mean, where did that even come from? I've heard other things. I mean, it's just going to get worse and worse. We didn't get nominated for an iHeart Award of any sort. They don't know who we are. They don't care. We have a huge audience. We have a successful podcast that's been going on 11 years. We're
Shunned. Snubbed. Well, I'm not saying – look, that's their show, and to be honest, I had to smoke a little weed to really get into it, but then I was really into it, and I watched quite a bit of it. But that's just their show. They don't know. But Rogan's correct. It's a disgrace that they're one of the most successful podcasts and they don't know the origin. So he's right. That's disgraceful. More disgraceful was not even knowing who you are.
That he does the podcast with. There's another guy who's like a science tech guy.
Some guy named
Dvorak.
Bob Doyle. Sorry, I had it.
Bob Doyle.
Bob Doyle.
Bob Doyle. Now the funny thing is, Rogan and I have communicated, and he follows me on Twitter.
You're Bob Doyle.
I think this is what would you call it when you get back at somebody for calling them a lizard or an alien?
I think when we called Rogan an alien, you became Bob Doyle.
Yeah. I didn't call him an alien. It was Alex Jones who called him an alien.
Yes.
I'm going to give you the big enchilada. Joe, there are aliens in this room right now.
For real?
Yeah, you're not of this world, bro.
Me?
You're the alien.
Oh, wow. I didn't know.
I didn't call him an alien. It was Alex Jones who called him an alien.
Exactly. Okay. So I want to run through the history, and then we'll be talking about some technology stuff. But this will be the ultimate. We'll be done with it, and we'll never have to explain it again. What is
put money on that?
Well, I'm not going. How about this? I won't explain it again, and people can cut this out, and this will be from my experience. All right, we're 1999, 2000. This is how far back this really goes. I just moved back from New Jersey to the Netherlands, and the Netherlands, Amsterdam in particular, had cable modems because the Netherlands is 90% of all maybe even more, 98% of all scientists and households have cable. So cable modems came along very quickly, and they weren't blazingly fast. It was like maybe 128 kilobits or maybe 250 if you were lucky. But it was being sold as not as broadband. It was being sold as always on. So you did not have to dial in with your modem. And, so there was multimedia stuff on the web, but there was no experience. It didn't matter what. I mean, the MP3 was just coming along. We had, like the Rio and stupid MP3 players that were really quite antiquated compared to what you see today. So, broadcasting or streaming or anything like that it just wasn't possible. There was no way you could do it. There were no services at the time. I don't think real audio had actually come out yet at that point. Maybe it had. In 1990, though, just as an aside, I did broadcast the Mega Music Dance Experience from the Jaarbeurs in Utrecht, which was a huge dance party on the M-Bone, if you remember that. Remember the M-Bone?
Yeah.
You walked away. You walked away from my story. I need you for color. Come back.
Okay. I remember the M-Bone. I remember what was that crazy network that guy did, that one character that had there was a bunch of crazy stuff that was going on during this era.
Yeah, the M-Bone was amazing. It only worked, you could only really see it if you were at a university, but it was multicast. And so it was the exact opposite of the problem that we have, which is the more people who watch or listen, the more bandwidth it eats. And this was kind of like a chained multicast thing. Anyway, I digress. At the same time, Napster came out.
Real Audio was initial release is April 95.
Oh, so it was before that even. But I remember encoding took forever. There was no experience. So then Napster happened, and I remember opening up my Napster client, and what was so mind-blowing about this is you could see, this is some guy's computer, and you could, there was, if you were searching for a song, it might show up, and you could explore his computer, and you could start up these downloads. And, you might have 10, 12 downloads going. It would take a long time because of, no bandwidth. But it was always on, and the phone line wasn't tied up. And I was like, wow, what if I made the experience by changing the thinking? In other words, your computer's on the whole time. There's something you want it when it's new. Let's say a new song. That's how I was thinking at the time. But your computer had initiated a download, but didn't tell you it was available until it actually had downloaded onto the computer, and would pop up a message and say, hey, I got something new. You click on it, it plays immediately. Great experience. So really unattended, your computer should be doing this in the background. And I wrote an essay about it called The Last Yard. You could probably find it. Now, at the same time, so I had this in my head. I'm like, broadcasting. How do I broadcast? How can I do this? And I was like, I knew that there had to be a way, just like the news broadcast. You have no idea how long it takes for people to put the news together and make that hour-long show. There's pre-produced packages. But when it's time, all of that just flows out to you. So it's kind of the same idea of have everything happen out of sight of the user. And at the time, Dave Weiner had just become pretty well known with RSS, and he was doing his blogging software. You can read at Weiner at scripting.com. And I went to New York because I felt like I could somehow work with him to use RSS. I wasn't quite sure, really. And we met in a hotel room. I don't remember why he was there. I know I went specifically. This is 4/9/11. I went specifically to meet with him about it, and I explained it, and he really brushed me off. He was like, "All right, like Hollywood guy, MTV guy, shut up."
Hair,
yeah, guys who are bald really don't take to me right off the bat.
For good reason.
Yeah. So hair. And then I came back the next day and I actually had some of his software and I tried to program what I meant in his software. And after another 45 minutes, he says, I get it. You are forbidden from ever using my software again. That was horrible. So, okay, I don't mind. And so he came up with the enclosure element in RSS. And for several years, because he had his little Radio Userland was his aggregator and blog publishing software, we were just sending like 100 megabyte video files back and forth. And it would show up on my computer after it had downloaded. And I clicked it and had a great experience. So it was exactly what I envisioned, and nothing happened with it until the iPod. I saw the iPod and I went, holy crap, this is not a jukebox. This is a radio receiver. We need to be able to put radio shows on this iPod. And I started making, with an Apple script, a little parser that would go look, and it was just for one feed. It would go look at an RSS feed. Is there a new item? Yes. Download it. Download the MP3 file in this case. Then when it's downloaded, and at the time you had your iPod you could only put stuff on it by syncing up to your computer. So the Apple script would then trip the syncing of the iPod, and so this all happened while you didn't know it, because this was, it was polling on a recurring basis. And the experience was you picked up your iPod, there was a new radio show. I said, holy shit, this is it. And I immediately started the Daily Source Code. The Daily Source Code, my idea was to bring serialized radio content every single day. And I called it Source Code because we needed receivers. We needed the reception side. So if you remember the pod catchers, they might have been called. And all of a sudden, guys started showing up who were doing applications, again, just, podcast apps called iPod or Lemon, iPod or X. There was a whole bunch of different things that were happening. It was going very, very quickly. Then I met Kevin Marks. I want to include him. Kevin Marks, who I think now works for Google. He worked for Apple. And I was having some issue with we learned a lot about how a podcast app works. I was having an issue, and he actually sent back a much better functioning version of this Apple script. So he has an important part in the story, because that really tripped off all of this development and me doing the Daily Source Code. And I called it Source Code because my only audience at that time was dudes named Ben, and it was dudes at the time, who were building this receiving podcast software. So I would
same audience as today.
It's basically, and some of the same people. And so at this time, and I do want to say that Dave Weiner, I think with Chris Lydon, had done a couple of interviews, and they put that on the RSS feed. So was that a podcast? I don't know. Was the M-Bone a podcast? It's irrelevant. The idea that I propagated was you can make radio this way, and it's different because the radio show comes to you. It's listening by appointment. The idea of show notes, which we still call show notes, was completely ideated from the Daily Source Code. And I also started the directory. It was called the iPodder directory. And how that worked is a whole nother story. But I had the definitive directory of all podcasts by country, we had it, you could break it out any way you want. It was kind of like a distributed database. And then some guy came into the mix. His name is Danny Gregoire. And Danny Gregoire coined the term podcast. And because we were calling it soliloquies, all kinds of stupid things. But he showed up in a comment somewhere. I like this podcast. And so to me, even though, yes, Ben Hammersley had used that word years before there was anything really, Danny Gregoire is the guy who used it in context. So they have the directory. We have all of this working. And then I get a call around 2004, 4 or 5. Hi, it's Eddie Q from Apple. Steve Jobs wants to meet with you. Are you interested? Let me check my calendar. So I met him at All Things D, which is outside of Quincy Jones, one of the most interesting meetings I've ever had. And he was angry, and to the point where, not about me, he was angry about, they fucked up Wi-Fi. This is not how I wanted it to be. He was just angry, and he was yelling. But then we had an hour. And I thought, actually, man, you get sick if you're so mad like that. And we sat for an hour just chit-chatting about stuff and how, the RIAA was all on his ass to shut down recorders that can record songs internally on the computer, and so they've been kind of saying they would, and they just weren't going to do it. And it was like, wow, it's very interesting. And he said, Adam, I want to put podcasting into iTunes. Is that okay? I said, yeah, that's fantastic. And I'll give you my directory. Now, he already had it all because he went right on stage a couple hours later, demoed podcasting in iOS or in the Mac, which is a very funny video. Go look at that on the YouTube.
Adam Curry is one of the guys that invented podcasting. And he has a podcast called The Daily Source. Let me go ahead and subscribe to that. And we can go listen to his latest one. Just click on it.
I've actually had to restart the show 3 times. My Mac has been acting up like a motherfucker. I don't know what's going on. I think it's something to do with the file system.
Okay.
Now, how do you control, say, dirty stuff?
Which is a very funny video. Go look at that on the YouTube. So he already had that already. He knew exactly what he was doing. And then came kind of the disappointment. Because after, now podcasting launched. It's like, holy crap, we were in iTunes, we're on the iPod. And what Apple did is went straight into putting NPR bullshit everywhere. Of course, NPR was very instrumental. I want to say WGBH in Boston was the first NPR station to do anything independently. They were doing podcasts. But Apple became this directory that sounded just like everything else on the radio, which was exactly the wrong thing. That's the part that Steve Jobs didn't get. Because when you hear some of these different voices that is not as polished or differently polished than the radio, it's exciting. I think a lot of people went and like, okay, that's great. I can listen to NPR. All right, great, Steve Jobs. Thank you very much. I think a lot of people missed out on what was really happening. And then there's a whole story about why podcasting fell off the radar for 10 years, which has to do with the rise of social media and YouTube, etc. But that, to the best of my recollection, is how podcasting came to be.
Adam Curry, John C. Dvorak. This is No Agenda.
The best podcast in the universe. Dvorak.org/NA.